The Tech It Up Talk podcast aspires to educate, inform, and inspire educators from teachers to school leaders on tips, tools, and resources to support the integration of technology into classroom instruction.
You ready? Here we go.
You're listening to Tech It Up Talk with Dr. Mac, your host with the most passion for supporting educators from teachers to school leaders with the integration of technology. Today, we are tackling a topic that every education leader wrestles with when it comes to building innovative schools. How do we get budget for technology and do it sustainably? And so, as we know, innovation is so exciting, but it also comes with real costs, real planning, and real decisions. And to help us unpack this today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Kirk Petterson, who's an experienced educational leader from being a superintendent to post-secondary and to the college president. And so I'm super excited to have Dr. Petterson on with us today, who brings depth with his expertise, definitely in budgeting as a part of his past roles, of course, in order to really support and sustain education and different initiatives. But today we're focusing on tech and education and his insights to help schools move from the wish list to actionable, well-funded innovation plans. And so welcome to the Tech It Up Talk podcast, Dr. Petterson. How are you today?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mack. I'm doing great and appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you and spend some time with you. And one, we get to know each other a little bit more, but also talk about some innovations and how schools can tech it up and be able to afford it.
I love that. Well, Dr. Petterson, start with us. And, you know, we call you Dr. KP, so I'm going to go ahead and call you Dr. KP here too. So, Dr. KP, can you start by telling us a little about your background and how you kind of really came into the education space and how it kind of evolved over time?
Well, one, I never thought I'd be in education when I was, growing up and through high school, even college. My mother, 36 years, college prep English and social studies, and my dad was a teacher for some time. So you could say it was in the blood. So, when I went on to college, I decided I was going to pursue a master's degree in mental health counseling and also sports psychology. And then that just kind of took over, and I ended up spending 6 years at the University of Tennessee, graduated 2 masters and PhD, and did my PhD simultaneous to my second master's. And then I realized teaching was something that I wanted to do. When you're coming out, you think about research, you teach, you become a teacher and advisor. And so I had an opportunity to interview as a finalist at a very prestigious program in Texas. And I also had a chance to go to Gardner-Webb University. And I fell in love with the idea of teaching. And that's really where it came from. And I had amazing professors in college, but my major professor when I was doing my doctorate, she was a teacher, advisor, and I wanted to do the same thing. So that's eventually how I got into education. Started off as a university professor, ran up the ranks, and eventually took over as president of the university. And then in between the 2 stints as president, I spent quite a bit of time working as a superintendent and 2 different schools, and it was an amazing opportunity, blessing to do so. But that's where I learned how to do a great deal of the budgeting, certainly from the K-12 perspective and in that space. And it's a humbling experience because you get into schools that don't have much, and then you get into schools that have quite a bit. And what I love to do, the purpose of me joining T-Mobile was to chase the passion project, but also to really bridge that gap of inconsistent access for our kids. Because, we hear this all the time, not to be cliche, but these kids need to know the technologies. They need to know how to work with AI because 10, 15 years from now, the jobs that we don't even know are going to be available, they're going to know how to do because of that. And so we need to get our kids involved in technology early and often.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so when we talk about the cost of innovation, what are some big picture budget considerations that schools often overlook when trying to implement technology or new technology?
Well, in anywhere from K-12 to university, everyone makes the same mistake. They don't budget for enough bandwidth. they can never keep up, because at the university level, most students are bringing between 6 and 8 devices to connect to the Wi-Fi. Everything from smartphones to gaming consoles to laptops to iPads to headphones, you name it. And K-12, kids are still bringing. They have their watches, they have their phones, they have computers, they have iPads. They're also connecting too. So bandwidth is a huge deal. And the other thing is that a lot of administrators, they know a lot about technology, but they have to lean on the technology professionals. Those who are going to install, those are the people going to help advise. So the other big picture item I think that is often overlooked is getting the IT people involved from the very, very beginning. So that way, the associated costs and what the pain points are going to be. Because if you're switching over software, it takes time, takes energy, and it takes a great deal of stress to get through that. And so there's a lot of time that's not budgeted. There's a lot of bandwidth that's not budgeted. And then the thing about it is it just snowballs. It's not going to get smaller. It's going to get bigger. The files are going to get bigger. They're going to get more advanced. AI is going to take up. And so now you're really having to look at how do we keep the best technology in our kids' hands, and how do we do that across time? And then you look at your budget cycle, and that's where a very innovative superintendent and board, principal, however that works, can get, and they could design a plan, and then you kind of reverse engineer it. We know we want to be here in 6 years. The problem with it is you and I both know in 6 years, the technology they hope to get to it's obsolete at that point. So as they go, they have to develop and evolve with the field. And I think that those are some of the big mistakes that occur, especially at the higher level. But the IT people really have to drive the train, because they're going to know, the ins and outs. They're going to know the do's and don'ts and everything about just moving in a different direction from a technology standpoint.
Now you hit something. Yes, you hit something really important. I think that happens often, depending on how school districts are set up. You said IT needs to be aware, right? Sometimes we have decision makers that have their own budgets, and they're making decisions about technology, but not necessarily always including IT in that decision process. Because at the end of the day, it's IT that's the end. Put it into play, make sure everything's working. And then sometimes what I found in my own experience is that if you wait too close to the school year, you're trying to implement programs that needed some time to scaffold and kind of work out some of the kinks before. And I think sometimes some of our decision makers, mostly on the, maybe on the instructional side, or sometimes that may not be as tech savvy, don't always consider the things that are needed to be thought through, that IT would need to go through to think through, because then I find that they had this large investment, but the adoption wasn't in place. And so now you spent this money on this technology that you thought was wonderful. It's going to do all these amazing things, but your adoption didn't really take off. And you're starting to have issues across your other stakeholders, teachers. They're having bad experiences because they weren't really included at the beginning of that. So that can also affect your budget as well.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have a cross representation of folks that are talking about the technology needs. The IT people are going to have it from a variety of different ways and voluminous in depth, but the classroom teacher may have just come back from a conference and said, this is really great technology that our kids need. I'm going to really push for it. Well, that may not be in the budget, or it may take the place of a budget item. And so that's the kind of camaraderie, that's the kind of collegiality that's going to be needed in order to continue to develop. But the other thing I think that administrators make mistakes is that, corporate side of technology and the educational side of technology don't necessarily go arm in arm, okay? So the corporate side, in many ways, is so significantly advanced over what educators have in the classroom that relationship has to exist. You got to have that knowledge base that the corporate side had, because of all the emergent technologies that educators, either one, may not have been able to afford, two, didn't know, or three, just don't have access to. And so we have to kind of always be that Hey, do you know what's exciting coming around the corner? Let me tell you about it. And then let educators see it. And I think the trade shows, the conferences are very big and very important. But, superintendents, IT people, they should call folks like, T-Mobile and call folks like us, Dr. Mack, who can go in and help solve for their issues that they're having.
Yeah, I love that. And, when we think about like some of the experiences you're sharing, that teachers do come back, or administrators come back, and there may be something else that's in place already that
Yeah.
we spent money on to adopt, and maybe they don't know the bells and whistles of it. And
Yeah.
so what are some common, with that in mind, what are some common mistakes or challenges that you see schools or districts may make when they're first starting to budget for new technology initiatives?
Well, I think the training that goes along with it. I mean, just simply changing the district's phone from a Samsung to an Apple or vice versa can cause significant distress with a lot of folks. So, we have to have the training that goes along with the new technology, because if the classroom teacher or the staff member, administrator, whomever it might be, if they're not trained on that technology, then that technology is going to waste. And taxpayers should be upset about that, because, and parents and students and things of that nature. But we don't plan enough training in a lot of cases. We make an assumption that these technologies are very intuitive, but they have depth to them that we can only imagine in some cases. And some of that depth is what makes our job so much better and easier, more effective and efficient. But if we don't have that training to get to that deep level, we will just be scratching the surface of what that technology can do for us. And that's really just antithetical to what we should be believing and how we're moving forward. We should make the technology work for us, not necessarily work for the technology. How does it work in our district? How do our teachers need it to work? And then,
Right.
We solve for those type of problems, the questions.
Yeah, I love that. It has a lot of times you have that, beginning of the school year, all the professional development is happening. Hey, we're going to introduce all
Yep.
these things at the same time for you. And you can do this with this tool. You can do this with this tool. But here are some other priorities that we're going to also talk about and that we're implementing this year. And then we
Yeah.
don't come back into the training. So I think it's really important to scaffold that process over time to really, if you want to have meaningful change take place, you want to be intentional about the technology you are bringing and how you're developing, and know that there are going to be gaps. You're going to have
Yeah.
your early adopters,
Yeah.
you're going to have your laggards, and addressing those different scenarios. And also, I like to always push to getting your stakeholder feedback.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make decisions without their voice included,
Yeah.
or how things are going. Like, what
Mhm.
can we do differently to really make that change happen? So I love that.
Well,
Yeah.
people may have a question. Does the software do this? And if we can say, well, yeah, it sure does. Let me show you. And then we just may have made a whole department's job easier, more effective and efficient. And so with all that too comes satisfaction of your faculty and staff. Even if you look at bus drivers, I mean, the nationwide shortage of bus drivers, but all the technology that's coming to help aid the bus driver, keep his or her job, because the most important job of a superintendent is to ensure the safety of the students and faculty and staff. Well, that starts with buses, getting them to school. So the technology that goes along with the buses, that all has to be budgeted. I'm working with the school right now that it may take us 2-3 years in order to get to everything they wanted to do. But what we first do is we start with the foundational piece so we can future proof the solution, so that we've got that embedded. And now it's the foundation, and we can build. But 2 years from now, the technology may change, and we can change with the technology. But that future proofing, that foundational piece is there. So that's kind of how I go about when I'm working with the schools. Tell me where the pain points. Tell me how you want to use the technology, what you want it to do for you, and then let's get really, really smart people who know technology on the phone, that know these type of solutions. So My job is obviously, I'm not a tech expert, but what I can do, and I can have a conversation with faculty, staff, students, administration, whomever, but mostly what we're working with are certainly administrators telling us what their vision is. Then they look at us and say, how can you get us there? And that's the beautiful thing about the team that we have, is that we're able to now come up with those solutions as part of, you know, the cost and the bid that goes into it. We're not charging extra just to get them a bid. You know, so I think those are the kind of things, because, you know, a lot of schools do make a mistake in going with mom and pop kind of places, although I love mom and pop places, don't get me wrong. But, you know, maybe bringing someone like us in, you know, and I mean us like T-Mobile, where we invest in the schools, where they may be paying for equipment over here. We may invest in them by helping them with that equipment on our side. So it's the cost and benefit. So when administrators need to get the 2-3 quotes and pull people like us in, T-Mobile and others, in order to get that quote, because that comes with the many people behind the solution. Whereas, you know, some places they just don't have that type of depth.
Yeah. So what funding sources should schools be considering to support their technology goals?
Well, you know, a lot of schools will even budget technology, and it's usually part of a vision and like a strategic plan. You know, whether it's a 3, 5, 7 year strategic plan, it's going to be embedded in that. So part of the funding that they're getting from taxpayers is going to go into a line item that's for technology. I can promise you it's never going to be enough. Okay. So there's going to be times where you have to rob Peter to pay Paul. You might have to borrow it from here to pay it over here, and then you might have to return it the next year, those kind of things. All right. So there's the obvious budget process that the superintendent, the board goes through, whether it's private or public. So that money has to be allocated, and you have to think about what it's going to take, and then how do you future proof. More than likely, where you're going to see bills increase year after year. You know, it's not necessarily because it's just advancing technology. They don't seem to get cheaper each year. They seem to get more expensive. And so that's a big part of that too, Dr. Mack. All right, so other budget areas that I've seen, you know, private schools throughout the country may or may not have access to state title monies, okay? And even and so when I was in Ohio, we had access. So we were able to get state monies every year, and we were able to use that to develop what we had. We had nothing embedded. And then by the time I left, we were getting ready to knock on the door of virtual reality. And we were getting that advanced, and their kids were picking it up very well. So we budgeted, but it took us 4 years to get there. We knew it was going to take some time, but we budgeted, we planned it out, and so on. All right, so you got the title monies that are certainly associated with that. There could be special incentives, you know, special programs that come out of governor's offices. And so that they need to be looking at not only the governor's office, but the state Department of Public Instruction. A lot of times they'll have grants and scholarships there as well. So you have state money, you have federal monies, you know, you have budgeted monies, and you have grant monies, and then you have, you know, certainly gifts in way of cash and donated goods. So there's a lot of ways to get after it. It's now just figuring out how can I get the most and affect the most amount of kids and the least amount of money, because that's the name of the game in education. And so there's a lot of different ways to get after the cash, and I've seen a lot of different ways, but the best way is to make sure the CFO, that's, you know, the chief financial officer, is firmly behind what's happening, and that person is also help guiding the process. So, you know, without talking about specific scholarships and grants and things like that, those are the variables that I tried to get on my side as best I could as a superintendent, certainly as president, you know, to have myself surrounded by that type of brain power.
And when you think about budgets and pockets of where, I guess, technology needs to be thought through, let's think about like some of the realities of some of the schools may need to prioritize over others. What are some of those important pieces in that strategic planning make sure they're allocating and at least bringing forth to light important areas that really need to be addressed that I know may have constraints on the budget.
Well, in almost every strategic plan, when it comes to technology, it's upgrading, and then expansion on some things. Bluetooth and high-speed internet throughout athletic venues. It can be, cross-country. The course itself. It can be golf course. Athletically, we're seeing a lot of people get into and start to really advance how they're streaming to their constituents, if you will, to the moms, dads, grandparents, and so on. So, Dr. Mack, when we start talking about, a lot of the different technologies and certainly the ways in which, we're trying to make the biggest impact, right? And so, Dr. Mack, I think, gosh, that's a big question. I have to admit, there's a lot that you can say about this, right? I mean, what maybe can you talk a little bit about some of your experience, and maybe I can join in and chime in, and maybe we could talk this through a little bit more, and so I can flesh this out, because I'm having a hard time finding, specific examples that would help me with this.
Oh yeah, no worries. So like when I'm thinking like being strategic, there are some technology we just need to have in place. So for example, safety and security in schools, some things that may support instruction, other areas to enhance communication channels. And so like thinking through some of those different buckets and categories of items, it's important for school districts to have to prioritize wants and needs.
Right. So I use the athletic example because that's usually done maybe through booster. So it's a different set of funding. And so the athletic directors raise money for that through booster clubs. And so everyone gets the benefit from that. So that's one way in which that strategy works. And so you budget and you build towards that, but you have that external group helping you. Okay. So some of the other strategies, safety and security, number one. Okay. So we're starting to see a lot of cameras at entrances that are able to capture license plate and even maybe a picture of the face of the person driving. Okay. That in a few months, years, Dr. Mack, we're going to see AI help with that. That would be tremendous to also then helping public safety, police officers, sheriff departments, so on and so forth. Because if a bad person comes on, it's recognized, AI will notify law enforcement. So we've got to be able to strategize for that type of technology, because we have to ensure the safety of our kids. So you got cameras at the entrances, you got cameras at the entrances of the doors, hallways, gym, everywhere. That's a lot of money. That strategy is not an immediate strategy. We're working with one school that trying to bring a security system. And there's nothing going to be cheap about it, but he knows that it's needed because they have, standard of care versus standard of practice. Standard of care is what are schools like yours doing? And if you're not doing that, well, that can be held up legally as you not really taking care of the safety concerns. So the strategy behind safety and security, I find number one. Okay. And then everything from that standpoint, you go into the classroom. For the kids and then for the faculty and so on and so forth. So how do you afford all that? You can bring in partners who can help you get the equipment, but there's going to be costs associated with, the type of connectivity. So, Dr. Mack, when it comes to all this, everything from kitchen to after school care, it is an IT person who needs to be directing how can this roll out, what's the best, and then listen to the consumers, the people who have rated those. So I appreciate you with some of the prompts helping me out with that. I hope that that's what you were trying to get me to answer.
We definitely want to share. We know a lot of times I think when we talk about technology, we're immediately thinking about software pieces for instructional practices, or maybe connectivity or
Yeah. Yeah.
devices for students to use for instruction, but technology really plays this part in so many areas of education outside of just the classroom itself, in the
Right.
school ecosystem. And so just kind of like thinking like how schools have to even think about not only advancing our learners, but like you just said, and really sets number one, ensuring that they're safe and able to
Yeah.
be able to learn in a safe environment. And so yeah, no,
Absolutely.
you hit it right on. Okay, so let me ask you this. How can school leaders, whether a superintendent, CFOs, principals, how do they really work together to align their goals, over some of the things we just discussed, to really make their budgets realities,
Well,
with the strategic planning process?
I always believed in a very collaborative environment to do this. So I'd bring the department heads, who's in charge of English, who's in charge of social studies, and so on and so forth, all the way from PE teacher as well. And then I would bring in bus drivers. I'd bring in transportation, just enough that you don't get groupthink, but just small enough that you can get some very diverse answers, and talk about a cross section of the people who could say, well, we as transportation folks, we need this on our buses. We're not getting it. Well, if that's the case, one, is it violating federal or state law? If obviously, if it's any of those, the bus is not in operation. But if there's something on the verge, we need to correct those kind of things. So that becomes an emergency. All right. So, when it comes down to all of this, it is getting the right people around the table to listen as to what is needed to make the biggest impact on the students. And you're going to have some external partners. So I was always in favor of having an external advisory group, people in the professions. What are you seeing in the profession that our students need to see? And so if that's the case, we could probably maybe even use technology that they're seeing on a daily basis and teach our kids.
Right.
I go with the example of coding, cybersecurity, all those things. Anything technology, AI, uh, kids are going to be in a phenomenal position. We were fortunate in Ohio to bring the drone program to the school, and we partnered with Gates Aeronautical and Embry-Riddle, and we had exclusive agreement for 3 years. But I also had a former F-15 fighter pilot who was big on the drone program in the military, helped spearheading it. Well, we got the right people around the table, and when our kids graduated, Dr. Mack, they could have a $70,000 a year job at the other end of it at 18 years old, and that's a future. And so, the future may not include how you and I got educated, going to a university, sitting for 4 years doing all the college. And I loved mine. No one had more fun in college than I can promise you that. But I can also say this, is that college is going to be, and education is going to be anytime, everywhere. And it's going to be much different. And I do believe that AI is going to interrupt our space something significant. And so I think superintendents, school boards, IT, they should do all the research they can on AI and how it's going to be a disruptive force. And I don't mean that necessarily negatively. It's going to change how we educate. And I think that's the biggest issue. I'd go to as many conferences, listen to as many podcasts, and read as much as I can on those emerging technologies.
I love that. Well, for our leaders, who may be listening in today, what is one key budgeting tip, or mindset shift, if you want to think about that as well? That's important too, that they should adopt when planning their next technology initiative.
Well, the big initiative has always been the one-to-one. And I think that a lot of schools have done a really, really good job with that. Making sure that kids have connectivity for home without question, but always planning for that bandwidth. What is it going to do to us? How much is it going to affect us? What do we need to do in order to increase bandwidth, and so on and so forth? And in some cases, it may or may not be possible. So a budgeting tip, when you get an idea, IT should tell you what it's going to cost, and then talking to them is, how do we implement it? What is the true cost going to be in training and time away from downtime from people not knowing how to use it? So all that, getting it started and the startup costs associated with that, Dr. Mack, I think the budget tip that I'm going to give is say, get your CFO and your IT people in the room and figure out how to get it done over a period of time, because technology is not cheap. And usually when you can afford it, it means it's outdated already. And so I think that we're really going to be looking at different ways of how to fund this as well. Well, it may not be purchase. It may be on a contractual basis with a, Fortune 40 company, and they always getting refreshed, but they always have a bill every month too. So,
Right.
that's one way to stay above and on top of technology, because it's going to boom. It's going to be fun to watch. And for those of us who are a little bit more long in the tooth, it might be a little scary to see too. So,
Look, I love that she said by the time you can afford it, maybe already outdated. I'm gonna, I'm gonna take that back because that is true. I see some schools who they just want something, but at the end of the day, we're trying to serve students, and we want our impact to be most impactful in their experience and their journey, so that they're walking out of our schools and our school systems prepared for their next stage of their life, whether it's going to college, whether it's going into the job force or military, whatever the case may be. But we want to
yeah,
make sure that whatever we're going to invest, not just something to say that we have, we want to make sure
yeah,
that what we are investing in is meaningful and is able to change the narrative to what can really enhance their experience, whether it's them being safe in schools or enhancing their learning environment to make it more meaningful. So
oh,
thank
absolutely.
you
And
so,
it,
yeah.
oh, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I jumped around a little bit, but there's just so many different ways to get after the strategy and the funding. And everything's driven by the school board, but it takes a vision of a super or a principal or someone like that to be able to give that vision to the school board about what we want to do, and then drive like crazy to get there. Then involve the people who have the technology. Get them in the room, find out how relevant, are we moving in the right direction, and then get people who can help you finance it. And I'm going to put a plug. Call people like you and me. We can help them.
I love that. Yes. And so, Dr. KP, how can our listeners connect with you to learn more about strategic budgeting for tech and stay updated with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and it's just Kirk Petterson in North Carolina, and you'll find me. Uh, I think that's the easiest way. I'm not on any of the others, only because I spent so much time on it as a principal and super, and as a super and president, that I did it to be able to keep track of my students. So, but LinkedIn is one way that's great, and then certainly, they can always contact me via phone and also email through LinkedIn. So. I'd love to be able to have conversations with folks. If I can help, great. If I'm in the neighborhood and if I can stop by and help you, I'd do it too. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Peterson, for helping us think through more strategically about the cost of innovation. Because, of course, it's not just about buying tools, it's about building sustainable, impactful systems. And so, for those of you who are listening, if you're ready to lead smarter budgeting conversations and turn your innovation ideas into funded, actionable plans, be sure to follow and connect with Dr. Peterson on LinkedIn and stay connected. As always, I want to thank you all for tuning in to Take It Up Talk with Dr. Mack, where we explore how to level up learning, leadership, and school culture through innovation. And so until next time, keep innovating, keep planning, and wisely, of course, and keep leading with tech.
thank you, Dr. Mack.
Thank you.
Have a great